you'll notice that when we press play, the particles that are emitted act as almost like jets for the particles, for the rocks as they interact with the ground. And the reason this is happening is because on our emit from surface compound, we're treating all of our particles, big or small, with the exact same mass. Now, objects that have a larger mass should generally displace objects that have a smaller mass. And what we need to do is increase the mass of our boulders and make, by contrast, the mass of our small fragmentary rocks much less. So the states that we are using are a great tool for splitting things like mass. So the mass of my boulders, the objects in state 0, I'm going to set to a fairly high number, let's say to about 6. They're quite large rocks. Now, when I look at the particles in the collision state, the spawning state, and they are in state 1, you can actually notice now that some of the particles are yellow, state 0, and blue, state 1. In state 1, all I need to do is set the particles to have a slightly different mass. So for that, I'm just going to use the setters. If I look under mass, I'll just type in MASS. I can get or set the particle mass. In my case, I just want to set the particle mass. And I'll make it more interesting, of course. I'll execute on spawn. And I'll even randomize the mass ever so slightly. So I'll plug in there, and I'll set the mass to something small, like between 0.08 and 1.3 or 0.13. Okay, so by proportion, the mass of the boulders is much more, therefore they should displace the smaller particles. We also have a size factor as well, and I really want the particle's size to be associated to the random mass that I've set. So the size of the particles being emitted is fairly small, 0.1. So again, I can use the same ratio here. I can just reuse the range to randomize the size. The other thing that I need to set is the color and shape of these spawned particles. The spawned particles are also the instances of those rock shapes. Now, I don't necessarily want my rocks breaking apart. They're quite large in terms of being boulders. So what I'd actually like to do here is make these spawn particles represent more of a snow-like effect. So under the color, I can randomize the color by gradient. Pull that in. And I'll connect the output of randomized color into the color input of the spawn on collision, state 1. And I'll choose a color palette that's fairly neutral, so some mid-grays, so from dirty kind of snow, and some light-colored snow. And I don't want that effect to be animated at all. I also need to set the particle shape. So if I look up the setters, I can look up set particle shape. I'll execute it into spawn 1. So I can just rearrange these groups of compounds here. And I'll set the shape to be spherical. I'll then even go in and perhaps randomize the actual XYZ proportions of these spawn on collision particles, if I need to. They're so small right now that I might not even need to go there. The random value should be more than enough. So let's see what we have now. I'll go full screen, and if I hit play, we're actually getting particles emitted. It's kind of hard to see. If I move into a wireframe mode, perhaps it's a little easier to see. The particles are dying off very quickly, but we are indeed getting the emission that we were looking for. So if I need to, I can emit more particles and also have them live for a little longer as well.